This is In Proximity. I'm Paola Mardo, head of audio here at Proximity Media. You might know us from the movies we've made, but we also make podcasts and TV shows. I run our podcast here as well as our socials. And today I'm excited to share a very special episode on our flagship podcast, In Proximity, spotlighting our new TV show, Ironheart. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Chinaka Hodge, the head writer and executive producer of Ironheart, about her creative process for writing the show and how she drew from her personal experiences to create the characters that we see on it too. Ironheart is a production of Marvel and Proximity Media, so when they were in production on the show, Chinaka actually sat down with executive producer and Proximity founder Sev Ohanian to talk about what it was like to be in the writer's room, how she, Sev, and Ryan met back in their college days at USC Film School, and their journeys as writers and producers.
I'll never forget that first day because you set such an amazing tone, and that was your first time running a room, right?
Yeah.
Can I read this email that you sent to us a few days before? Is that okay?
I'm really embarrassed, but yes.
We have that part of the show. It is audio only because that's how we were doing the show back then. I'll sit down with Chinaka here on video, but also available in audio, and just get a little bit more of a deep dive into her process. Ironheart follows bad girl genius inventor Riri Williams, played by Dominique Thorne. While her character originated in the comics by Brian Michael Bendis and Eve Ewing, on-screen audiences first met her when she was on her internship abroad in the film Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, co-written and directed by Proximity founder Ryan Coogler. Riri is on a mission to be the greatest inventor of her generation, which she says doesn't mean much without the resources to bring her ideas to life. So she resorts to alternative means to get said resources, and on her journey she meets a host of friends and foes, including her AI based on her best friend N.A.T.A.L.I.E, played by Lyric Ross, and Parker Robbins, also known as the Hood, played by Anthony Ramos. So if you don't already know, Chinaka is an accomplished writer of so many mediums. She's a poet, an educator, rapper, actor, playwright, and screenwriter. She's worked with many notable folks from Steven Spielberg to, of course, Ryan Coogler. And she's a touring slam poet known for a TEDx talk with over 1 million views. She recently staffed on MGM and Michael B. Jordan's Creed series for Amazon, and she's developing multiple projects with collaborators like Daveed Diggs, Justin Simien, and Will Packer, to name a few. She was a 2013 Sundance Feature Film Lab Fellow, a 2022 Kennedy Center 100 honoree, and honestly, the list goes on. I can't keep up. Chinaka grew up in Oakland and is deeply involved in the arts, culture, and music community of the East Bay area. It's going to be a great show. We're going to start with my video conversation with her right here in the Proximity Media office. And then on the flip side, we will have her audio conversation with Sev Ohanian that they recorded back in production. And that's our show. Enjoy. Yeah, it's my real office. Yes.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
I love to be on the lot, and Proximity, the offices are so nice.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Boogie.
Before we get into the actual podcast, a new thing happened on this show that you didn't get to do when you were on with Sev that you get to do now.
Okay.
It's called the Get Real segment.
I'm really excited.
So there's a surprise question for you. Inside. So you.
What makes me most nervous is not answering the question. Is having to hold the microphone while opening this video.
It's all good. You got it.
As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? As a child, I very much wanted to be an actor.
Really?
Yeah, I was in like modeling classes and acting classes and learned to walk and walked with a book on my head. And like, I was in the Bay Area, so I worked with N.A.T.A.L.I.E, and I was like one of her girls. I remember like very vividly the era was like Journey Smollett and like other curly haired girls 90s. From the Bay were like, early 90s in the Bay. And my very first gig was doing the voiceover on a CD-ROM about...
A CD-ROM?
A CD-ROM.
We're bringing it back.
That was like a geography CD-ROM. And all the Wakanda fans will like this. It was in the center of Africa. It was like I was a girl, a Central African girl who was explaining both coffee export and import for the CD-ROM.
At what age?
11.
Amazing. And so how did you go from actor to writer?
Acting was not for me. And I think I knew that fairly early on that it didn't feel authentic to the way I wanted to express myself. I did poetry for a really long time after that and performed in slams all over and sort of felt limited by the 3.5 minute format. wanted to, I was telling somebody the other day, I wanted to argue with myself on stage. And someone was like, you want to argue with yourself on stage? That sounds like a play. So I started writing plays from there. And then after playwriting and working with Camposanto and Intersection for the Arts, who you might know through their work with Sing Sing, moved down to L.A. and met Ryan at grad school and sort of off to the races from there. Yeah.
I love that. So I'm very honored to be sitting here with you in the office. We have Ironheart over here.
Wow.
Of course, she's wearing the older suit.
I didn't even peep that.
But I did want to take it back because, you know, you are a writer first and foremost, even though you've acted, you've rapped.
Yes.
You're a playwright also. There's so many things I feel like you've done, educator, but it always seems to come back to writing. And I wanted to ask, first of all, it's very personal writing too. That's what I've really noticed through the show and also the other work you've done. I got to read excerpts of your debut book of poetry, Dated MCs.
Oh, Dated MCs is my second, and I appreciate that you read the second and not the actual debut.
Okay. The internet called it the debut.
That's
I shall edit that.
That's fair.
I love this. A series of poems about your coming of age during a pivotal moment in hip hop.
Yeah.
I would say 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think the book is, it's called Dated MCs, and it centers around my time in the early aughts, sort of like the Y2K era of MC.
And this is what I love. I mean, first of all, what I got to read was humorous, but also haunting and deeply emotional. And I saw a bunch of folks had written about your work. And in praise of your book, your friend, the actor, writer, rapper, singer, songwriter, David Diggs.
I was like, it's only 2 or 3 people who match all that.
He wrote that you write, and I quote, you write with the grace of a dancer, the bars of a rapper, the heart of your best friend, and all of the swag and soul of Oakland. How do you feel about that?
Man, I should have paid him slightly more. He would have written slightly nicer. No, that's the kindest thing anyone could say. And then from David, it means he's known me since before I started performing poetry. And I used to go watch him perform in the plays at school. So yeah, a compliment from David about my artistry and my craft means the world. Can
you talk about how, you know, you're now writing or head writing a Marvel TV show, which we'll get to, and developing so many other projects? How do you stay true to yourself as a writer, you know, from when you write personal stories or personal poems, but also when you write like a big Hollywood project?
So it was a really great question. And I think the act of staying balanced is, you know, both like the hardest thing for a human to do. I was headstrong, foolish, passionate enough to try and do Ironheart while being a new mom. And so in so many ways, I feel like when I'm writing for Aziza, when I'm writing with my child in mind, it's very easy to write from a soulful, heartful, mindful place. I think it got really hard to balance motherhood and work life. And so the things I want to change most in writing are the places where I had to I knew I was running for a bottle and I just had to get a line down on the page, or vice versa. I knew I just had to get a line down on the page and didn't get to play with her in the same kind of way. So I don't know. I over the last few months, I've been really trying to get back to my natural and authentic voice. And who am I if I'm not writing for Riri Williams, which is, it's a hard adjustment for real, because I lived inside of her body and her suit and her mind for so long. But it's also a joy. It's like coming into my own again and again and again. And I would say I'm really excited and really nervous and really precious about Ironheart in a way that makes it feel like one of my poems from when I was 13. Like it feels like I'm risking something in a way that I'd lost along the way of performing sort of from my catalog and in and around my poetry community. I sort of knew my bounds and knew where I could shine and knew, like, I know how to rock a house, but the challenge here was collaborating and revision and trying to synthesize poetry and Eve's writing from the comic books and Bendis's writing from the comic books and make something that felt legible to people who hadn't read any of it, especially not my poetry. So if you don't know, Brian Michael Bendis and Eve Ewing both took different runs at the Ironheart comic book series. Brian originated it, and Eve, who's a good friend of mine from the poetry scene, handed it off to me. I think I'm still getting back to my authentic voice, and I think that's the task of the artist consistently. And I'd say, like, without any, like, trying to gas anybody around, like having a circle of people like Ryan, like Sev, like Zenzi in proximity, no pun intended, has made the huge difference. And, you know, people who've known me since before I was making for Marvel and before I was in any of these seats at any of these tables. It's been really good for them to get back to me and say, like, nah, remember when you did X, Y, Z? Or what about this one poem you started? Or remember this show we were working on before? So it's nice to have trusted artistic friends like the Kuglers, like the Sevs of the world in my corner.
Yeah. And I love that we're going to play on this episode your conversation with Sev, which honestly, I feel like listening to that after this is going to be so interesting because you guys were so in the thick of it.
We were babies. What do we know? What do we know?
What did you know? But I wanted to ask, and let me clarify. I want to make sure I don't say this is your debut show and maybe it's not, but is this the first show you've created?
This is the first show I've created. It's the first show I was a head writer on. It was the first show I got the EP title. So it was the first in a lot of ways. It was the first room I got to hire, and I'm really, really proud of our room. I'm really proud of both who we hired and why we hired them, but the way I got to run the room. It was a big dream of mine to run a television writing room in a similar way that we run a poetry workshop. And so we started from a writing prompt, and I asked the writers in the room, tell me about a villain in your life or tell me about a hero in your life. And that was our first day out. So yeah, I'm very, very proud of the firsts that I did on this show.
It's incredible. For those who don't know, because oftentimes when you hear TV show, like the head writer, you hear the word showrunner, right? There's so many producers. What can you just explain to folks? What is a head writer and what is an executive producer in terms of what you did on Ironheart?
Well, I would say the role of head writer, executive producer is very unique to Marvel. So most shows outside of the Marvel setup, smaller budgets, less cinematic, and move with one showrunner. This was super collaborative between the Proximity offices, my offices, which is called Restitution Pictures, and Marvel, and our beautiful creative execs there. So it was a team challenge in a different kind of way than most writing rooms operate. That said, my role on this show included writing scripts. So I wrote episodes 1 and 6 on my own, and then I wrote alongside many showrunners will completely rewrite the writers in the room. So the writer will give a draft, and then the head writer or showrunner will take it and just put their own spin on it. I didn't want to do that, and so I think we have 6 episodes that feel like 6 unique voices that all sing together, which was a big goal of mine. On this show, I worked alongside costumes, stunts, our beautiful hair and makeup department. I just got to watch. I didn't help at all. I just watched. Yeah. I got to weigh in on casting decisions. I got to weigh in on lighting decisions and prop decisions. I got to weigh in on which panels of the comic book we should be recreating.
Wow. Can I pause you right there? Yeah. What is that like?
That was super fun. And I think like that was actually Sev's strong point. He's, he loves panels in a way that I can't even pretend to love it like Sev loves it. So, and same thing for Kelsey Liu, who was also in our room, one of our creative execs. They were just both really good at poring over the comic books and finding things that felt both iconic, inside of character, didn't tell too much plot or story, and then gave to Viz Dev to sort of recreate. So my favorite frame in the show it's in the trailer. She goes head up in her suit against a delivery truck.
Yep, I was hoping you'd talk about that.
Yeah, okay, cool. And like we got it frame for frame. It's really freaking cool to know what SFX, VFX, writing, everybody had to work together just to get one frame that matched the comic book panel. So it's also like for our audience, like, man, if we had to work that hard for one frame, imagine why we can't
6
produce
episodes.
the panel frame for frame for frame, why the TV is going to be different than the comics. So yeah, I got to touch so much on this show in a way that I don't think most head writers outside of this or other writer EPs necessarily get to play in the world unless they're showrunner. So on this, I was kind of like demi showrunner. Showrunner in training.
Can I ask, let me take it back really quick, because my understanding is, even though this show is produced with Marvel and Proximity, and while, Ryan Coogler, Zinzi Coogler, Sev Ohanian are executive producers on the show, you did have to pitch yourself for the job, right? And to Marvel.
I did.
Right? And I don't know what you can or can't talk about.
I don't know how much I can talk about it because I'm bound by an NDA, one NDA to Marvel and one NDA to Proximity.
Okay, I'll ask you and you tell me if you can answer.
Okay.
I'm just curious, what was important to you to say in your pitch? Why did you really want to do the show, and what was your pitch to Marvel? Part of your take, what was unique to your take?
There were a couple different ways of approaching stories I wanted to tell at the time. And I whether or not I was working with Proximity or Marvel, I was very clear in all of my pitches, wherever I was, that I wanted to write a strong woman. I wanted to write action. I wanted to write her in everyday circumstances with extraordinary power. And so I pitched on Marvel's one of Marvel's projects that has not yet gone, which was a really good fit. And I got really far down the line and made good friends with all the creative execs along the way. And then I could tell just like in my very last moment of the pitch, I pitched something that was too close to a different Marvel show. And then, I watched it go, I literally watched it go out the window.
Yeah.
And I was crushed.
Can I ask how long that pitching process takes? Is it like weeks or a couple months, a year?
Okay. Months with not a lot lot of writing, but a good deal of ideating.
But it takes time. Yeah.
It takes time. Mm-hmm. And I'd gotten like, I was in the world of that pitch enough that like that story still wakes me up at night, and I still like can see that story in my head. So hopefully come back around this way. One day. I was also pitching on a different proximity project that I won't say too much about, but is not one that the world has seen. And I remember in the proximity pitch process, Sev going, "Knock, you have a lot on your plate right now. Are you sure that this is the project you want to be doing?" And I was like, honestly, no. There's this other thing that Marvel's pitching that I'm really interested in doing. And Sev and Zinzi and Ryan all kind of like smiled and then hung their heads. It was the strangest reaction. Now I know that they were partners on the other project that I wanted to be on, but they had been able to see on both sides of the table, maybe in three sides of the table, that I was pitching this strong woman character out in a lot of ways. And it was the best fit for Ironheart, for sure. It would have been a like square peg round hole for the other two projects. So it was really nice to feel supported by my friends, because I felt like Sev asked me as a friend, like, "Yo, friend, you got a lot on your plate right now." And I think if I hadn't been honest and just been like, "No, I can do it."
Yeah.
My good friends would have been forced to be like, "You can't do all three at the same time," and probably none of them are a good fit. So I don't know. It felt like the right moment in my artistry to choose what I wanted and to say what I wanted and to be able to like, man, that fell on like safe ears. What a blessing.
Yeah. What a blessing. And then so when you got the call, you pitched for Ironheart. First of all, do you pitch in front of Ryan Seven Zinzi? Is it in front of Kevin Feige? Like what does that look like?
I pitched to Zoe and Kelsey first.
Okay.
And they helped me get ready for the pitch to Prox, and then Prox helped me get ready for the pitch to Marvel. So,
amazing. And this is Zoe
Nagelhout.
Yes, executive producer and Kelsey Lee supervising.
Of so many Marvel projects that you know and love. And I worked with two other executives, and I'm not sure if I can say their names, but two other executives who remembered me from the first project from Marvel, who like stewarded me along and suggested me for Ironheart.
Yeah. I love that because I feel like, working in this industry, you just never know who you're going to end up working with, or like that person you meet in a pitch one day, maybe that doesn't work out, but then later down the road, they call you for something else, which is an even better fit.
You know what? You're right. Shout out to N.A.T.A.L.I.E. and Eric. Thank you for having my back.
There you go. And so, sorry, when you said, proximity, Zoe and Kelsey, they helped prepare you for each step. What was the final step?
The final boss was Kevin Feige, Victoria Alonso, Lou Desposito, and Brad Vinderbaum. And I pitched out probably a half hour's worth of pitch with both like story ideas, which was really just an exercise in them seeing how I build story, because what you see on screen is so far away from the pitch. I pitched out some things, though, that like are in the DNA of the show. So I wanted some of the murals that you see in and around Chicago, and I even named Max Sensing. He's in the show. Nice. I wanted to make sure that we had someone like Harper Anthony. He's in the show. I wanted to make sure that like our Gary felt real and someone from Chicago, and you see who we got. So I feel like there were some elements of the pitch that really were like what I would bring uniquely to the table that were the things that made the pitch sing.
And I want to ask, because a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast, want to write, want to direct, want to be in that room pitching their version of whatever story. I don't know. Do you have any advice for someone, like whether it's their longtime pitchers or even just first time?
I would say that knowing your story, top to bottom, inside and out, is better than a PowerPoint or Prezi or any other preparation. Knowing your beginning, your middle, your end, your complications, what your antagonist is going to bring, what your protagonist is going to bring, and just stress testing it. Telling that story to your mom, your dad, your abuela, your tita, like everybody along the way. Knowing this, like my favorite person to pitch to is my sister, who will be like, "Ooh, Naka, that was good," or "I don't understand this part," or ask questions along the way. So I feel like knowing the story as well as possible, so that your enthusiasm and your passion can shine through. And also, like, my favorite part of the pitch is getting to the questions, and when my audience is leaning forward, asking me questions, it's a really good thing. So I don't feel like you need to know, you don't need to tell them everything in the pitch. You just need to know everything in the pitch.
Leave them wanting more a little bit.
Leave them wanting more a little bit, but also like A to B, B to C, C to Z, but also beginning, middle, end, complications.
Yep.
Like, know those things so that you can rattle it off so that when Kevin interrupts and is like, wait, what about blah, 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 and you go on a side tangent and you learn about Lou's like last trip to Italy and, you know, like, so you can come back to your pitch and get back to the C to Z.
What is it like to get a question or even a note from Kevin Feige?
Kevin's so sweet and he's so smart. Kevin is specific. He's conscientious. He's never mean for the sake of being mean. And he holds, 20 or so movies and 6 or 7 TV projects and 4 or 5 things down the pike in his head all at once, and is able to connect the dots and offer, like, for example, we have a big spoiler in our show and he's the one who suggested it. So like, and it was on the heels of like, this could be more interesting. How about you take this? So he's benevolent in the ways he can be benevolent.
Can you talk a little bit about, well, first of all, I think I mentioned this to you on our call before this show. What I really loved about watching it, because I've seen all the episodes, is while Ironheart is, played by Dominique Thorne, she's a superhero. She is within the MCU. She's this bad girl genius. It's very much this comic book superhero origin story. But it also feels very grounded, very real. Her day-to-day life, her neighbors, her family, her friends, the people she gets, involved with and goes on adventures with, they all feel really real, even though they're wrapped up in this comic book story. And I wanted to ask, because you do write very personal stories, were there bits and pieces from your own personal life, whether it's people or events, that inspired the show and the characters?
I love this question of like what things from my personal life or the world at large affected and became part of the show. I joke that everything I write becomes true. I think it's the other way around, that everything I see becomes part of the writing. But there's so many elements. So maybe it's best to start with Xavier. Xavier plays as Riri's love interest throughout the series, and he's a musician who prefers analog to digital and is sort of like old school musician. He's based loosely on my brother, who's a musician, and like even the room that Xavier's in looks a lot like my brother's room. And my family went through a little bit of tragedy at the beginning of production where my brother was actually in an accident. And so a lot of the room is a tribute to my brother, who was in critical care and like emergency care for a good deal of production. So that's one of like the truest, clearest references. I had a neighbor when I was living in Toronto writing the show who was a bit persnickety about her black-eyed Susans. And so that made it into the show.
Love that detail. It's so specific.
Probably my favorite detail and probably the most heartfelt is Desperitos, which is the villain's lair that Parker and his crew hang out in the whole time. Our writer's assistant on the room is Nicole Desperito. And her name just lends itself to character. Like, we were going to name somebody or something after her. Let's just face it. But I got to ask her a little bit about the origin of her name, and it's her father's name. And her father was a firefighter, one of the brave who fought the fires that occurred in 9/11. And he passed after his time there. And so it was my great joy to be able to honor Nicole, her work, her incredible work as a writer's assistant, which often gets overlooked, and then her father's sacrifice for our country. I feel like it's so Marvel to name a villain's lair after a true American hero. So
it's perfect.
There are other details in Desperitos as well. So my grandmother, who loved hanging out in Chicago jazz clubs and took me there a lot. There's a picture of Chloe hanging in Desperitos as well. So there's little details like that throughout.
Chloe's your grandmother?
Chloe's my grandmother,
Love
Chloe
that.
Hicks. Yeah. So there's little details like that all laid in.
Can you talk about the Alanis Morissette scene? What was the thinking behind that? Because I did not expect that in a Marvel TV show.
I don't think you expect it in a Marvel TV show, but let's be real, you also don't expect it in a show with Black girls. And I feel like that's the kind of girl I am. It's the kind of girl Mallory Howard, who wrote the episode, is. It's in a lot of ways the way Riri is. She's lived in lots of worlds. She's literally lived under the sea. She's lived in Wakanda for some amount of time. She lived in Chicago. She's been exposed to a whole bunch. So I think it's not far from the reaches that she might also like Canadian pop. Like it could happen.
It checks out.
It could happen. And I feel like Alanis, for me, in my like 13, 14-year-old days, was like, she was how I announced rebellion. She's how I announced my womanhood. She like was an incredible genius in her own right, who put out like her first album at the age of 14, 15, something crazy like that. Like she's a prodigy in her own right.
That's
so
amazing.
I feel like Alanis seeds through nicely through our show. Plus, it's a bop.
It is.
You ought to know.
You ought to know.
Have you heard the Beyonce version?
I don't think so.
Find that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
We have homework.
There's a reference. It's super quick, super fast when we meet a clown played by Sonia. That's a reference to Angela Bassett in Brain Fart, Waiting to Exhale. Thank you very much. From Waiting to Exhale.
Oh, with the explosion?
Yeah.
Yes.
So like down to the white coat and the style of her hair. If we had stayed in frame a little longer, you'd see it like come out like that. And I feel like that's a cool little Marvel thing to have like a nod to Auntie Angela.
Did you guys, and I don't know if this is giving too much away, was there a Get Out nod? Was there a little...
Not to...
A little action? Okay.
Yeah,
maybe that's too much.
A little bit.
There are a lot of little nuggets.
Yeah, there are.
I will say. And I also want to ask, I heard your mom was an engineer.
You heard right. My mom is an engineer. My stepfather's an engineer. They both went to Northwestern. My mom is from the era where you had to get a degree in both mechanical engineering and computer science. So she can do both. She can MacGyver anything. She can make any table level. She can... Amazing. That rattling window, no more. Doesn't rattle at all. When I was growing up, she had a whole bunch of telecom accounts. So I remember her going to Japan and France and helping to pioneer what the tech looked like there.
Wow.
Shortly after that, she worked in and around the technology that became the Palm Pilot and helped the world talk about how you might use the Palm Pilot, help distinguish it from like your Casio organizer.
Right.
Yeah, my mom's the shit. My mom's the shit, and she's been at it for a while. One of my favorite pictures of her is at her IBM training, where she's the only Black woman in she's the only chocolate chip in the cookie, and she's sitting in the middle, and everybody else is on their Dilbert outfit, and my mom is like pressed. She's got like a beautiful like silk organza tie situation on, and like the glasses and her cute little haircut, and I was like, yes, my mom was serving.
And how did some of that sort of influence? Because Riri's an engineer, right? Riri's
an engineer. I think, my mom definitely influenced it, but Riri in a lot of ways is like me. Her peach ring addiction, her inability to make eye contact from time to time. Yeah. I think Riri, both in publishing and in my imagination, is neurodiverse and neurodivergent like I am. I identify as autistic, and I think Riri is, we see her process through a whole bunch of her own neurodiversity. So yeah, she's my mom, she's me, but she's really the young autistic girl watching our show who has a really big brain and is not quite sure where to put it and is told all the time that she's behaving badly and might get kicked out of school.
Yeah. And goes on to do great things.
Going on to do really great things and fight villains and make bad choices and live the life of a character.
Exactly. Let's talk about process.
Yes.
Because this is a show where we talk a little bit about process. Yes. I want to say, because you just mentioned all the personal things that you put into the show. Can you talk about what does that look like in a writer's room? How do you guys get together? It's like therapy? You guys are just sharing all these bits and pieces of your life, throw it on a wall, and then pull from there? Or like, what does that on the ground look like?
First of all, we had the best writer's room.
Okay. Say more.
I can't say that enough. The sisters Gales, Francesca, Jackie, Christian Martinez, who was our action specialist, Mallory Howard, who we could not have made this show without her, Amir Suleiman, Nicole Desperito, who wrote all of our previously ons. We had an incredible writing room, and we got to write. I mean, it was COVID time, so it was remote. We got to write together every day, and I kept it pretty brief. We did like a 10 to noon, a short lunch, and then a 2 to 4 situation. Aziza was very much a part of the room and nursed and gave feedback on
and how old was Aziza at that time?
Aziza was younger than 5 months when the room came together, and 6 months when we really started doing it. And you know, when we left Atlanta, she was 2. She's almost 5 now. So, our room was really special, and it was special because we had executives in the room, which is not the usual way of doing things. But our Prox partners were there every single day, and then Zoe and Kelsey were there every single day. So everyone had personal things that came to the table. I think like there were some people in the room who have trans siblings, and we wanted to make sure that there was representation in the MCU of people that look like our siblings. I think some of our parents were struggling through stroke and cancer. And so I think a character like Zeke, who's interested in pioneering, to save lives, I think really rang true and through. Fran and Jackie were raising kids. They're sisters, and they were they were both raising one's kids at the time, since they both have kids. But at the time, they were both really interested in making what they called the little boy and the little girl television that they could watch. So I think each of us, Amir is a poet, and I know him from our poet days. And Amir had just come off of Rami and won an Emmy for his writing on Rami. And nobody could bring the spirituality and sensualism. I feel like it's okay to call the Sufi a sensualist.
Sure.
But he brought a different touch to the room and to the page as well. So yeah, I everybody brought something personal, and those are the kinds of writers we hired, and that's the kind of room I run. But also, I don't look that gift horse in the mouth. It was incredibly personal, and people sacrificed a lot to be in and around the show.
Yeah, and I love that. And as the head writer, you just said you're running that room. How do you sort of wrangle everybody and make sure you guys stay on course, but also have that time to be creative and just develop?
I feel like there was a bit, Ryan wrangled us, if I'm being real. Like when Ryan came to the room, we were like, okay, let's have our ducks in a row. Sev is also very process oriented in a way that I am not.
This all checks out.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Zenzi was, I'm going to say her name right. Zenzi was her typical, very thoughtful, very creative. She did not inject herself where she wasn't sure she could add value, but whenever she spoke, she added so much value. So yeah, I think they kept me in check. I did something. I brought some best practices from the nonprofit world into the writing room. So we did evaluations 1 month out where they could evaluate me and not the other way around, tell me how I was doing as a showrunner, and then I could get feedback on the writing as well.
Not a lot of people do that, I feel, especially a month in.
But that's the time. That's the time. Because if you wait till 8 weeks in and I'm only giving notes, that's not a time for dialogue. And I don't think we can make good art that way. And I've been in enough Hollywood writing rooms that I've had less than savory experiences. And I wanted my writers to leave our room feeling like, even if the show never made it to air, that we got something once in a lifetime out of the experience of the room itself.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that because it's leadership, right? I mean, everyone thinks about writing and writers' rooms as if it's this magical creative thing, which it is, but there's also process, leadership, dare I say management,
feedback, community agreements, all the things that we know kind of wrote in the Bay Area were very well applied in this space and very well received in this space. So I would say I would change nothing about my writing room except, with this big, large asterisk caveat, is that I would provide free childcare for all of the people working on the show. Amir has kids. Like I said, Fran and Jackie did, I did as well. And I feel like that's one of the few fidelities that we didn't have in place to make our writers feel as safe as possible. I can imagine that. And, Sev and Zinzi have both commented if we could do something different, we would make it so that we could, make a little bit more balance so that we could all see our kids a little more. So.
It sounds like there were a lot of new parents or young parents.
There were a lot of new and young parents, and it was COVID, for real, not pretend fake COVID, real COVID. I would change plenty about the circumstances, but I would change none of the personnel, and I would change very little about the process.
Yeah. And can you talk about, just wrapping up this section, because people love hearing tips and process things when it comes to creativity. And I hear that, there were different perspectives. People brought different stories to the table, but how does that translate to the page?
Well, I would say my perspective is character first. So I would say that's one of the things that I brought, and probably was shocking to the other collaborators in the room of how long I wanted to spend on story. So we spent 3 or 4 weeks just knowing the backstory of the character, similar to what I was saying about a pitch, so that you can put the characters into scene knowing them well enough to know how they're actually going to interact with each other, as opposed to trying to figure it out.
So are you writing biographies?
We did biographies. We pulled, we started with people's own personal stories, and can we pull that in, or is this something the characters like? We spent time. They're documents. I feel like we could create a whole.
Was there a Bible?
Book. Yeah, we could probably make a Bible of all the Nicole Desperito TM notes. Yeah,
I love that. That's great. I have to ask, because it's Ironheart.
Yes.
We got to talk about the suit.
Yes.
And this is not the suit she wears.
This is not the suit, but it's a Phi suit. This is the one from Wakanda.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the suit she wears when people first meet her on screen. But in the TV show, by now people will know, she wears 3 suits.
She wears 3 suits. There's a mock 4.5.
You know all the technical terms. I don't.
Yeah.
But in any case, can I ask, the very first time you saw her in a suit, or you saw the suit, I'll say that.
Okay,
Talk about the suit and what that was like.
The suit and I have a storied history, and I feel like maybe you don't know this. Seeing her in this suit for the first time, like because I saw Wakanda Forever in theaters in Chicago while we were in production.
Oh, wow.
And so it was like, I saw Wakanda Forever like literally by myself on a Tuesday afternoon. I screamed in the theater. I was so excited. I'm a Mae Jemison fan. I'm a fan of like Black women architects and Black women explorers. And so to see this vision of us capable of going into space, capable of boring into the earth, capable of stopping a train. I don't know. It's just, it's so much safety in a suit like this. And I don't get to experience that safety on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. There's so much power in the suit. Riri's not challenged in the same way when she wears the suit as she is when she's out of the suit. And so to me, it's like, I don't know. It's like
she can fly in the suit.
She could fly in the suit. She could cook in the suit. And we spend as much time on the suit. Character development is the other story. So Riri's suit is actually satin lined in the helmet. Like there's some Black girl fidelities.
Satin lined.
Yes,
okay,
because she gotta take the helmet off and on.
Yes.
Understand? It's like she has some other like things in and around that help, like her suit is outfitted for every day of the month. I'll say that.
Yeah. Oh, very important.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Big things.
Yes. You guys thought it out.
You have to. It's engineering.
So when you saw, or can you talk about one suit and what it was like to see it for the first time?
Seeing her in the second suit, like in production, which is way more ragtag and more like an American quilt than anything else. That's my favorite of the suits, if I'm being honest, because it feels the most like, it feels the most DIY, the most scrappy, like the most like.
This is the one she builds. It's not the very first one she flies off.
Not the one she flies off with from school, which is a very, very cool suit. Yep. It's the second one, the one that she sort of like engineers from the junkyard, but it's the second version of that suit where she's actually put it back together a second time. That's my favorite because it's just like, it ain't pretty, but it works. And I feel like that's sort of my approach to filmmaking.
I love that.
The last suit, which we have a little nod to it here, and the show's coming out after, right? So this last suit was, I don't know, probably my favorite portion of design. I'm a sneakerhead, just like Riri's a sneakerhead, and we wanted to make a shoe that honors Chicago and the Chicago colorway and the bread ones, like the iconic Jordan ones. Yeah. Which the first suit, you could tell like she liked it, and the car that she had liked it. But this, like the red is slightly different, the black is slightly different, and I feel like these would go with pretty much any of like the band ones in the street. So we wanted to make something that felt like fashion forward. Something that felt sleek and could move very well, that had all the safety and protections of the last one. Her time with Harper and her time with her mom, who's an artist, really helped to like streamline the suit. So that last suit feels like freedom to me.
It's a good suit.
I like it.
Can you talk about, because there's so many teams, so you write it onto the page and also run the show, work with the directors and cast and all that. But there's like VFX. There's I don't even know the team that builds the thing, what they're called. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
I'm sure I will not get it all right because it was like getting thrown into the deep end. We worked on the suit. We would work with SFX, so special effects, which is everything from a practical effect, which is like things falling out of the sky, something that no one has to draw or animate, but is an effect that helps you suspend disbelief. We also work with previs, which is a Marvel term. I hadn't really like been in and around previs before.
Can you explain what that is?
It's basically like I tell you what I want on screen and they help you pre-visualize it. So I tell you I want a suit that looks like this. And they brought like 6 or 7 different suits that were red and black and silver. Did they build it
or they draw it?
They drew it. Okay, and then we looked at 2 or 3 different versions of it. Renderings, 2D renderings, 3D renderings. And then they brought in some models, and then I remember us like refining the models. There's a whole bunch of different versions of the suit. There's a suit that Riri steps into. It's built to Dominique's size. Yeah. There's a suit that Alex, who's our stunt double, who's much taller than Dominique, steps into. And when I say I have a storied history with the suit, the larger suit, the heavier suit we brought for our final day, like our wrap day in Atlanta. And I don't know. I think I'm pretty visible. I think I'm like an EP. I was there. Yeah. But I got run over by the suit.
Wait, what?
I got run over by the suit.
Oh my God.
That's like the full story.
Wait.
Like someone had the suit on a cart and they ran me over with it. And I got ran over by the suit. And then we call it, that's a wrap.
Oh my God.
That was my last moment in Atlanta. So I feel like extremely close to
Wait,
the
what
city.
happened to you afterwards? Did you have to go to the hospital?
I did not have to go to the hospital. I was very
God.
well checked on by our VFX team, our SFX team, the guy who was rolling the thing, a proximity representative. But yeah, it was a true, like a...
You felt the impact of the suit physically.
You know, like Ryan comes from a football space. I feel like very much in a football space.
You were tackled.
Insult to injury is I was like Ryan because he wasn't able to be there. So I was like filming the whole crew. I was like, look, everybody is cool. But I feel like how many people can say they've been run over by Ironheart? Literally one of one.
Yeah. And one of my last questions I want to ask, you know, you mentioned earlier having a song like Alanis Morissette and a show, you know, featuring a Black girl at the center. Not something that people would think of or assume or whatever it is. But you had a Black character at the center, a Black superhero, a Black woman. And then also behind the camera, there were many Black women, Black and brown folks, writers, directors, you. Can you talk a little bit about the vibe on set, the energy, and how that shaped the show?
What did the kids say? The energy was unmatched? Unmatched. We were very fortunate to be able to use Marvel's influence to call in the best of the best. And in this case, the best of the best happened to be a whole bunch of Black and brown women who really showed up for each other, who really... like I said, we were in COVID times, we were in thunderstorm times, we were in, you know, we had a big company move. And I saw all of our crew really show up for each other. And while I must highlight the arduous labor of Black women, I cannot leave out my brothers who were Teamsters who were there with us side by side. There were middle-aged white men who stood 10 toes down for Riri Williams in the state of Georgia. Wow. You know what I mean? Who showed up the day after Juneteenth and went to work for us. And if I don't speak that, it's a lie. You know what I mean? Our show was bolstered by our entire community who showed up for queer people, brown people, white people, like Jewish people. Our show is America, and it's not just that front facing, it was that behind the camera as well. So that being said, let me go off about my sisters. First of all, Angela and Sam, who helmed the show.
Samantha Bailey,
Angela Barnes, who directed episodes 1 and 3 and 4 and 6 respectively. Sam set the tone for the show. She created the signature for Riri in creating the pilot. She worked with Auntie Chang, who, Taiwanese by way of South Africa, by way of Canada.
I'm following the map.
He's that deal. And to watch the two of them collaborate was truly special. Angela Barnes works very closely with Allison Kelly, who was her DP on the show. And Allison brought such just verve and conscientiousness and thoughtfulness to every single frame. I learned so much about light, both from Auntie and Allison. And Allison, like, even her stills, like even when we were like sitting in Village watching her stills, I was so moved by how carefully she considered everything. Both she and Angela like went to war for us, like really plotted out had more plans in their office on how they were going to shoot things than shots probably. But I want to give a shout out to Terrence, who ran our department with a good deal of help from Sharonda Shepard, who is my favorite writer / costume designer / accountant. What can't she do? She can write, she could act, she could sing, but she gave her talents to our department and made sure that costumes were on point. Danny Hernandez and stunts, to come off Woman King and just like, have leveled up from Woman King and then shared that in our choreography. Shayla Cabrera, we could not have made Ironheart without Shayla Cabrera. Shayla, Javonda, and Chris Styron were the first on set every day and the last to leave, and they cared about everybody so intensely. And
what was her role?
Shayla was a PA, and Shayla was a PA who like kept coming back because she loved the work. I found out very late into it that the work was not guaranteed for her, but she kept showing up every day because she believed in the vision. Jalorina Sanders, but like the list is just so many people showed up. Ariel Lathan, so many people showed up to help bring this vision to life, and everybody gave their absolute best. But what makes my heart sing is that after this, they have more opportunity to do more. So many times we're told, oh, you haven't worked on a big enough budget show, or you haven't worked with enough cast, or you haven't worked with a big enough name. And after this show, they can all say they have. So I'm elated. I'm elated that we got to the stand-ins for Shay.
Yeah.
The stand-ins for Zoe. Like we got to put together the very, very best cast and crew. Yeah, I think because each of us has sort of been underestimated for so long that every woman who showed up on set knew to bring, their AAA game. Yeah. And because of that, we had a AAA team.
I love that. And actually, and folks will hear it in the next segment of this episode, but you told Sev that you're really excited about, quote, how many Black and brown people will live in the MCU after our show is over. And it sounds like it's the same even behind the scenes. What do you want to say about that now? That line.
I'm thrilled about how many Black and brown people will live in the MCU after our show. I'm thrilled that there's an outpost for magic in the MCU after our show. Good. I'm thrilled.
I want to see more of that.
I'm thrilled that queer people are like part of the MCU, like they're part of the real world. I'm thrilled that we have like so many different kinds of Black women on screen. That like Clown is not the same as Zelma's, not the same as Riri's, not the same as like. We have a prismatic approach to Black womanhood, which I haven't seen very many times on screen. So I'm proud of Alton Ehrenreich being in the MCU though. Like let's keep it a buck. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, you have so many characters that are. I hate to use the word diverse because I feel like it's so overused, but like so many different backgrounds, perspectives, voices, powers, which you'll see. Thank you, Chinaka.
Thank you, Paola.
Appreciate this. And everyone's going to hear the next conversation with Sev right after this.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a wrap.
You're listening to PROX.
Hey, I'm Sev Ohanian. I'm a producer, sometimes writer, co-founder of Proximity Media, and I'm here with my good friend Chinaka Hodge in her office in Atlanta, Georgia, as the head writer on Marvel's Ironheart. I'm surrounded by what looks unlike every other office in this building. All the producer offices are here. My office is here. Our Marvel exec, our line producer's office. And what all of the offices have in common is concept art from the show, the production calendar, reminders and things like that. But then I walk into your office. Can you describe for our listeners like what we're looking at around us?
I guess I should start by saying there's a superstition in writers' rooms that if you decorate your office, the show will get canceled. And someone told me that on my first day and I completely threw it out the window. So most writers keep it very spare, just their nameplate on the desk and like a stack of scripts. I've gone all out. So I have all of our actors and their Zed shots on the wall.
But it's not just the actors' headshots because we have that.
Yeah.
Describe what you have.
These are emotive, black and white, very artistic shots of each of the actors. And I tried to capture photos of them that existed on the internet already, but as if they were already in their character. Mm-hmm. So like Shakira Barrera is up there and I found the strongest picture of her possible because she's a bruiser in our show. The walls are also decorated with one of your past projects, a nod to it, one of my future projects, and what brings us all here today, which is Black Panther and the world around it.
Can you talk about what's behind you?
Behind me is actually my altar, and I build an altar wherever I go. So it's a remembrance of my ancestors and the people that have inspired me. I didn't know that Nichelle Nichols would be an ancestor when I put her up there. She was still a living inspiration when I built the altar, but she's now one of the ancestors. I also have art inspired by Octavia Butler. I have some art inspired by Aurora Monroe, aka Storm. I have Mae Jemison, the first Black woman in space, and Bessie Coleman, the first Black woman to fly a plane. And I also have a crossover episode where Nichelle Nichols' character Uhura meets Mae Jemison on the Starship Enterprise. It's dork, Black, nerd, girl central in here.
It makes perfect sense why you are the head writer on Ironheart. You and I go way back, like way back.
We met at USC. Ryan was well known. People kept telling me I need to find Ryan. And everywhere I went to find Ryan, you were nearby. And so I got to meet you on a number of occasions. And every time I met you, I was like, this dude has it together. And I'm not going to lie to you, Sev, I thought you were a professor. When I met you at USC, I thought you were a professor. And so the first couple interactions, I don't know if you remember, but I was very respectful. And I would like talk to you and then like walk away. I talked to Ryan and I walk away. And it took maybe 2 weeks and I was like, wait, this kid's one of us? Like, that's amazing. He knows everything. And so when you asked me to read your script, Animal Heist, which I still think is a flawless piece of writing. It's a piece of literature that I can't wait makes it into the world. I took it so seriously. Like I was so honored that you had asked me to give notes. I was like, Sev doesn't need notes from me. Like he's got it all figured out. And the way you went through my notes with me made me feel so honored and so respected. Like that's the moment I felt like I was a real life professional writer. Was the way you took respect with the notes I gave you.
Wow, that's so cool to hear. I mean, let me paint that picture a little bit. So We went to USC grad school. You were in the screenwriters program. I was in the production program, which is kind of like a more catch-all general filmmaking. And my writing partner was Anish Chaganty. He and I wrote a script that we had no business writing. It was a way too expensive, larger-than-life heist movie about a group of people who wanted to save a gorilla from the LA Zoo by like literally pulling off a heist to steal a 400-pound animal. And it was over the top and very like fun. By the way, we were convinced. Like I remember Anish would be over at my house. My dad was there and we'd be telling my dad, like, we're going to sell this thing for $500,000. Dad, I'll buy you whatever you want. And he would laugh and he would be like, I'll pay you guys $200 for it right now. And we were like, Dad, you're crazy, man. Like, man, you're going to miss out. We never sold it. We tried to get my dad to buy it later for $200. He laughed in our faces. But at the time, we were like, okay, we're done with the draft. We got to now get it to some real professional writers. And Anish was like, who do you got? I'm like, well, I got Knock.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think it's really about how you see yourself and how the world sees you. Because to me, you were like the most professional. You had done the... Can you talk a little bit about My Big Fat Armenian Wedding? Because like, you really never told me the story in full. And all I know is like you showed up and you had financed your own movie as an undergrad.
Oh my gosh.
Who does that?
Not to get too long, like when I was growing up, I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was very much intimidated by the entire idea, especially as a child of immigrants and immigrant myself. Like we were very much expected to do doctor, lawyer, all the usual stuff. And when I was in college and undergrad, just for fun, I had shot a little YouTube video of my friend making fun of his own father out of love and kind of recalling an anecdote of him coming home late one day and his dad kind of berating him. If it was today, it would be a TikTok video. 10 seconds, you'd never think about it again. But this is like 2007. Made this video, put it on YouTube for like my 20 friends to watch. To my shock, over 100,000 Armenians from around the world immediately liked the video, shared it, went viral, all that good stuff. I don't even think viral was a term then.
Wasn't a thing yet, yeah.
I was so shocked by this. I was like, let's make a sequel. And this one was about like a young Armenian girl who's like trying to date and the parents are like, no way. Like it was just all the usual fun stuff. And that also went kind of viral. There was such a demand for more of these videos. You know, I grew up in Los Angeles and there's a very prominent Armenian community down there, especially. And everywhere I'd go, Armenians who I'd see like in a city called Glendale would be like, when's the next one coming out? And I thought, well, why don't we just make a movie? I hadn't really thought about like what that would mean, which is probably for the best. I wrote a movie over a summer. I remember like spending all my summer school classes in the back just writing the script. And like when I say writing a script, I just downloaded some scripts. I like pirated Final Draft and I just like figured out how to do it. Shot the movie over a summer. I used my dad's home video camera and the crew was myself as the writer, director, producer, editor, everything. I did every job except for makeup. And then the makeup artist quit. So
you got that eyeliner.
I did that too, and it was awful. And it's called My Big Fat Armenian Family, and it's about two Armenian parents, both played by the same guy, who are very old-fashioned, and their younger children who are very Americanized and progressive, and that cultural clash, and how it comes to a boiling point over a weekend trip to Palm Springs, as we call it. Shot it for $800. Most of that money went to Taco Bell. And I finished the movie. I was in Glendale, huge Armenian population. I screened the movie. I booked the theater, sold DVDs, and somehow in just a few months, it made a ton of money. And I wasn't anticipating that. I didn't have a business plan. It was just kind of like a total shock to me. But more than the financial success, it was the fact that complete strangers were showing up, buying tickets, and just laughing and crying and loving the movie. That empowered me to pursue this as a real career.
As you're describing the story, you sound like E40. Do you know who E40 is?
I'm familiar with yeah.
I know you have like a business partner or two from the Bay Area, and E40, yeah. Earl Stevens, is the Bay Area's one of his like most reputable businessmen, but he did it all on his own. He like started his record company, sold it out of the trunk of his car, saw a need, filled the void, and like basically flipped it from $800 to a multi-million-dollar industry, like has wine and watches and like seats to the Lakers and Warriors, like everything. He's like the dude, but he started in the same way that you did, just like seeing a void and filling it. So I don't know. I never thought of you as like the politician that you are, but you are politician. That's you, bruh.
I mean, look, I was just trying, but I mean, speaking of people's past, like your reputation was preceding you as well. The word around campus about you was that you were a big shot poet. And that you had been around, you'd been performing, you'd been really doing some big things, and that you had now transitioned to screenwriting, which some would argue is almost a lesser art form. Can you talk about your upcoming as a poet?
Absolutely. So I'm from the Bay Area, and I started writing poetry as a high school student. I met this organization, Youth Speaks, and a Living Word Project. We work with upwards of 40,000 young people in the Bay Area and internationally, and I work with them for like 20 years for real. I was probably in year 15 when I moved down to LA. And in my head, I was a poet, but I was just a poet. And I felt like an imposter in the screenwriting space. I wanted to come. All right, I'll give you guys the real because of your proximity and we're friends. I got dumped. I was in a serious relationship. I thought I was going to marry this guy and he dumped me casually on a Friday. He moved across the street from me. And I just tried to figure out how to start my life over again. I had plans of being a wife and a mom and kind of sitting in my house and writing poems for the rest of my life. And that wasn't going to work anymore. And so I was like, well, I'll go to grad school. I'll apply to grad school. And I applied to UPenn on a library sciences scholarship. And I applied to USC. And the application for USC was probably due at midnight. And I think I started it at 8 p.m. Like I was just, Hail Mary, change my life, let's go. And I wrote down an essay that kind of flew out of me about a friend of mine that I wanted to make movies in remembrance of. And we had to write this elevator scene that USC is notorious for. And I got it off and I just said a prayer. I was like, if it's meant for me, it's meant for me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Annenberg. They said they're giving me a fellowship and I was going to come down and study screenwriting. So I think I was walking around the school very much feeling like, I don't know how I got here. These people must see my heartbreak like leaking off of me. I don't quite know why I'm here, except for I feel like God has put it in my path and I'm going to write the stories I know how to write. And I very quickly, I saw that SC has pretty scaffolded system of how writers can interact with the producing students. And there's basically one big film project a year and all the writers fight each other and vie for it. And most writers don't get it. One writer does and everyone else doesn't. And so I thought, I'm not even going to apply for the 546s.
So like 546, which is the like senior level thesis, the big competitive class the school puts a lot of money into, right?
Yeah. And so I thought, I'm going to go to all the other producers that didn't get their 546 made and go all the other writers that didn't, and I'm going to make the movies we want to make. And so I ended up working with a bunch of folks who ended up being great. I met Stephen Capel on day one, met Ryan pretty early on and would follow around. And I remember just being like, these people don't know that I'm not good enough yet, so I'm just going to get good enough and I'm going to beat them. So once they figure out that I'm not good enough to be here, I will be. It was kind of my goal. And I just wanted to make myself available so when we got out of school, they'd hire me. So the clearest thing I remember about grad school is following you and Ryan and being like, hire me, hire me, hire me, hire me. Worked out for me pretty well. You guys hired me.
I mean, we did. I mean, we've been trying to, too. What's funny is, you know, you were like my go-to like real writer that I would release at my first script to get notes. I remember that day, like taking your notes and like Anisha and I were just like scribbling them all down and we got it. If Knock likes it, then we're good. But it always felt to me somewhat predestined that we would work together. I'm not somebody who necessarily feels like things have to happen right away. I know that things will happen. I went up to Oakland to help produce Fruitvale Station with Ryan. And obviously you are Oakland to me. So I know there was a lot of conversations we had there. I know you also wrote a play, Chasing Meserly. I remember you telling us about it while we were still in production. Like, can you speak about that? Because we've talked about you as a TV writer. We've talked about you as a poet. What's Chinaka as a playwright?
That's where I went from poetry. So I started with 3 minutes of space and basically telling first person narrative and felt really limited there. And so branched out slowly into poetry, basically similar to you and your first film. I just wrote chunks. I didn't know they were scenes yet, but I just wrote little story nuggets. And they were mostly poems and started just fitting them together. The first play I wrote was called Mirrors in Every Corner, and it follows a fictional Black family living in Oakland between 1998 and the present, which at the time was 2008. And there's a daughter that's born naturally to the Black family, and she's born white. And it's about the way the family encounters race, class, and privilege over the next few years as the girl grows into a woman. The role of the older brother in that first play was originated by Daveed Diggs, who went on to star in Hamilton. I wrote a sequel for him to basically play a young man named Watts, who at the age of 9 sees Rodney King on television and decides if that's what life is like for Black men, I'm never going outside. He makes the resolution to take his first steps outside on January 1st, 2009, which is the day that Oscar Grant is killed in Oakland. And so that's the premise of the play. And I remember bringing it up to you and Ryan because I felt like it dovetailed eerily so with the work you guys were doing with what was called at the time Fruitvale Station. Ryan and I are both from Oakland, and we saw the same tragedy in real time and had the artistic responses that we did. I'm pretty sure we both started around the same time, and the movie came out just before the play did, and I was able to see the play sitting next to Ryan and Oscar's family. The play really explores agoraphobia and what happens when trauma isn't addressed in Black people, which I think is one of the many outcomes, is the senseless death of Oscar Grant. The play itself, I think, is an incantation. It's a spell. It requires everyone who's played this character of Watts to go really deep and to investigate their own mortality. It's the hardest play I've ever written. And I won't do it anymore. We did it at the Kennedy Center, and I think it did what it was supposed to do. Miss Wanda Johnson came to see the show and gave us her approval.
That's Oscar's mother, yeah.
Yeah, she came once, and Tati came once. And
Oscar's daughter, yeah.
Yeah, when Tati said, "Is this the part where my dad's going to die?" I was like, I never want to write another something that ends this way. I want to write way more joy into what we're doing. I want to write way more levity and way more light. I'm looking forward to working with you to bring it back around. And I'm looking forward to working on a project with you that forefronts joy or magic in some kind of way.
I can't wait. Let's talk about Ironheart, because I often remember the first day of the Ironheart writer's room. We had this incredible room with yourself leading it and 6 very talented screenwriters who joined the project. And, it was myself. We had our 2 execs from Marvel, Zoe Nagelhout, Kelsey Liu. But I'll never forget that first day because you set such an amazing tone. And that was your first time running a room, right?
Yeah.
Can I read this email that you sent to us a few days before? Is that okay?
I'm really embarrassed, but yes.
Okay, check this out. So this is an email you sent like literally a few days before the room started. Sent to all the writers, CCing the producers. And you said, "We're thrilled and truly excited to take the story journey with each of you. What luck to be in the room with this particular team of gifted, thoughtful, and generous writers. In hopes of building camaraderie and vulnerability between us, despite the challenges of a virtual room, we'd like to ask that you prepare for our time on Monday with your answers to the following 3 prompts. Number 1, your name and its origin. Number 2 was your people, as defined by you, who is your community. And number 3, be prepared to tell a story from your life that exemplifies heroism or villainy."
Man.
And he said, "Don't stress about this homework too much. This is designed to be a low-stakes way of getting to know each other."
That was pretty good. I'm impressed with myself. That was almost 2 years ago, first of all. That's how long we've been on this project. But second, it's my first time running a room. So there's like the benefit of not knowing what I'm doing wrong. So I feel like I went into it and I tried to run the room much like a poetry writing workshop, which is what my background is. I did it for 20 years and always thought like if we gave Hollywood writers the same tools that we give poets and tell them it's okay to make a mistake, it's okay to have a wrong answer, it's okay to be vulnerable, what would come out of it? We also had the challenge of trying to run a room during a pandemic and shelter in place in California. And our writers were actually all over the country. And I was actually out of the country while we did it. And so trying to figure out a way to bring Toronto, Atlanta, NorCal, SoCal together and make it feel as intimate as a writing room would feel on a lot. That was the goal. And so I tried to ask questions where I would have to be vulnerable on the first day. And then when I think about who was actually at the table, like gifted and generous is such an understatement for the Mallories and the Christians and the Jackies and the Frans and Amirs of that room. Like, man, like what a wonderful group. And it's really nice to hear my words back after all this time and having gone through the experience of that 5 months with them. It feels so far away, but I remember the excitement and writing that email and knowing that we're bringing together a room that was mostly Black women, that was brown people, that was immigrants, that was mixed people, that was queer people. Like I've never been in a room like that before. And I was so honored to have been in a room that was as generous and as kind and as communicative as that one was. I've never been in a room where no one cut off the Black woman. Like I'm constantly in a room where people don't get to finish their sentences. And in our room that rarely, if ever, happened. Like we all were allowed to pitch our stories in full and sort of live in them. Yeah, I just felt so honored to be able to bring together what I think is a really groundbreaking group of writers.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that for a moment, because it was, as you said, it was a really unconventional room in so many ways. I mean, from my experience, Ironheart was a show that, our company, Proximity Media, was lucky enough to help develop with Marvel. And obviously Ryan Coogler's movie Black Panther Wakanda Forever introduced the character to the MCU. And we had the opportunity to kind of take her beyond that. I think it really took a writer like yourself to see that as the opportunity that it is. And you created such a collaborative, established foundation of how that room can operate. And honestly, it's credit to you, because I'm so proud of the scripts that came out of that room. I'm so proud of the episodes we've been shooting. By the way, we are on the last week of filming in Atlanta. And it's so crazy to think back to that early day.
When I think about what our original like pitches were, even what the first break of the story was, the characters that were in it feels so far away from the story we ended up with, but the themes feel right on point, right aligned. Like we got to good and evil, magic and tech, big ideas in the MCU. And I think I'm more or less a Marvel novice. And I love the idea of like being able to enter into each of these characters' worlds for the first time. We basically did an origin story for every person we have up on the wall here. And I'm so excited about how many Black and brown people will live in the MCU after our show is over. I'm excited that we've created outposts, places that people can come back to time and time again, independent of Riri, that we have someplace close by that we can have experts in the MCU field. I'm really happy with the new ground we've created in the MCU.
Yeah, and like having been on the other side of the process in which you came to Marvel and you came to us with this idea, it was interesting because, you know, while we had begun developing the show, and again, credit to Marvel for really putting in all that work, you came with a pitch that, like you said, the plot of your pitch has drastically changed because it naturally will. But the voice that you established for Riri, I would argue, is exactly the same as it once was. And like the theme of what the character represents, and more specifically, I think what's really exciting about Riri for me was just kind of how it's less about what she is and more about what she's not. I think what is so great about the show and what you've done is it all works to tell a really engaging and controversial at times, but really hell of an entertaining story that puts all that stuff kind of like in the subtext and not at the forefront, which I do feel like we've seen sometimes be not as successful. And I remember that first day, I mean, within an hour of starting this session with these people that we'd gotten to know over the weeks prior as we were kind of interviewing and hiring them. But, you know, everyone was talking about their biggest fears. I remember I embarrassingly was asked, like, what's your greatest fear? And I said, entropy. To this day, it's become like this ongoing thing.
Which is probably my biggest regret as a writer and like someone who ran a writer's room, to ask you your biggest fear and then poke you with it for the foreseeable future.
But what I loved is, as people were talking about like their greatest fears or like moments of villainy or whatever, you were just steadfast writing notes. And over the next 20 weeks, whenever an opportunity presented itself, let's say we were all struggling with, how do we end episode 4? And we need something to happen. And you were like, oh, right, entropy. Like this climax of 104, we can incorporate an element of that. And it was because I think you understood that for everyone in this room, things that were very honest to us and truthful would find a way into the show in a way that was organic and less like artificial and engineered. And I bet if we had the time, you and I could watch all 6 episodes and literally point to where that very first day came into effect. And I do want to ask you, like, did you expect that to happen over the 20 weeks? Because that was your first time running a room.
I absolutely expected that to happen, but it's only because I've spent 20 years with 20 or so writers after school in 3 to 4, 5 o'clock hours, asking them their fears and vulnerabilities. As adults, we're not offered that very often. And I think for most people, the last time they can remember even having a writing prompt or touching something like that is probably when they're 12 or 13. So I like to offer that almost all the time when I'm in a room with adults. I think people want to be told what you have to say is important. And I think everyone enters a writer's room with immense amounts of fear. I won't say who, but in my first writer's room, the number 2 most powerful and arguably the one who actually ran the room was about 40 minutes late on the first day. And she's a woman. She came in and she said, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I've been outside since an hour before the room call, just crying. I'm just nervous. I'm just nervous and scared. I'm nervous and I'm scared and I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. And I'm 20 years in the industry and I always feel like that. And I feel like I should tell you guys that so we can work together. And I feel like that was my version, you know, what we did on the first day was my version of saying like, I'm scared. I've never done anything this big. I can only tell you my name, my people, and what moves me, and I hope that you'll do the same. And I think the next set of questions was, what's a hero, what's a villain, or name a time you were a hero or villain. And that's where we really got into like, we're all not so great, we're all not so bad. We're trying to write an anti-hero in Riri. And so getting to our own anti-heroism on day 1 and 2, I think made like foundation for things moving forward. Prox Recs. We're supposed to come up with some recommendations for our listeners about how to move through production. We're supposed to recommend some books, movies, etc.
Yeah.
So if we're going to second season of the Ironheart Room and you were telling people to read some books along the way, what would you suggest for our writer's room?
I'm not going to lie, I'm a very pragmatic guy, as you obviously know, and I would really recommend every single book on screenwriting that you can afford or you can get from your library. Like I follow that rule myself as a writer. I've read every single book. I mean, Save the Cat's a good starting one, but there's endless ones because I don't think you can go wrong. And the only thing you have to give up is a bit of your time. I'm also a really big believer in reading tons and tons of scripts, especially by the greats. I think a trick that I learned way too late in my career was if you're going to go read, an Aaron Sorkin, let's say movie, for example, read every single Aaron Sorkin movie in the order that he wrote them, because subconsciously you'll find yourself after page 30 on the third script, you can probably say the line that he's about to write, because it's an easy way for your body to just very literally by osmosis understand a writer's taste and voice, like we always talk about. That was really helpful.
Yeah. Aaron Sorkin suggestion actually reminds me when I was a poet back in those days, I had writer's block. And the main thing I would do to beat writer's block is I'd try and emulate the style of another writer. So I'd literally, every time I get stuck, I'd be like, how would Toni Morrison write it? And after like 10 minutes of being like, I can't write like Toni Morrison, I invariably go back to writing in my own voice. So I tried it actually with Sorkin early on and did it with like The American President and the West Wing scripts too. So I would say on this show, we've leaned heavily into the graphic representations of W.B. Du Bois. So I would definitely recommend that book. For all writers' rooms, I recommend a refresh on The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. I think just brevity helps a script. Being able to say something in 3 words is better than saying it in 10.
My partner Niche swears by that book, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you hate to read it. It's like the vegetables of books, but every time I read it, I get a refresh on what makes things great. All of Octavia Butler's catalog, starting with Lilith's Brood and the Parable series. I also reference Kimberly Drew's Black Futures, and then extra bonus point, I would add Saba, the musician Saba. He provided a tone and a vibe for this whole thing, and most of the scenes that I wrote that turned out well, I was writing along to Saba's music.
We're literally in your office, 3 days away from wrapping principal, and it's insane. It's so insane, and I'm so proud of the show. And, I've watched everything Marvel's ever done, and I think this is going to be really, really special.
I know the show is special just by virtue of who we have in the show. I know the show is special, and I haven't had a chance to like really look you in the eye and thank you. I'm just so thankful. Like I see you as like my little big brother.
Oh my God, same, right back to you.
In Proximity is a production of Proximity Media. Ironheart is produced by Proximity Media and Marvel Studios. If you like In Proximity, help us spread the word. Share this episode with a friend or loved one. Follow, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. It helps other people find the show. Follow us on social media. We're at Proximity Media on Instagram, TikTok, and more. We're also on YouTube. You can watch this episode in video on our YouTube channel. You can also find this on our website, proximitymedia.com, where we have transcripts and great behind-the-scenes photos there as well. In Proximity, executive producers are Ryan Coogler, Zinzi Coogler, Sev Ohanian, and Paola Mardo. That's me. I also hosted, directed, and produced the show. Ken Nana is our editor, sound mixer, sound designer, and mix engineer. Jonathan Chung is our director of photography. Isabella Miller is our production assistant. Alexandria Santana is our social media coordinator. Our production intern is June Sawada. Special thanks to Patrick Pino, to the Proximity Media team, and to you for listening to In Proximity.
Harry Potter is obviously a major influence on the show for you, correct?
It's a huge, huge influence. Everything that Harry's done. What's Harry Potter's last name? Is it Potter?
For our listeners, in our long writing room sessions, every now and then Nock would pitch some incredibly cool idea. And somebody would be like, oh yeah, like from Harry Potter. And Chinaka Hodge, ladies and gentlemen, has never read Harry Potter.
I read the first chapter of the first book.
It's not enough, man.